Before we begin, viewer discretion is strongly advised. The following is for educational and entertainment purposes only. This is the verbatim federal courtroom testimony of the Diddy Combs trial as reported by credible sources who were present during the proceedings. What happens when the people you thought would always stand by your side step away at the moment you need them most? When your own flesh and blood decides that loyalty has its limits? That's exactly what happened 1 minute ago when Diddy's twin daughters, Jessie and D'Lila Combs, refused to testify in his defense, sending the music mogul into a visible panic attack in the middle of the courtroom. Nobody expected the twins to take such a stand. The room was tense, eyes focused on the defense attorney until he announced that the planned witnesses had withdrawn their willingness to testify. Gasps echoed. Even the judge froze. No announcement, no pre-written statement. Just Diddy suddenly grabbing at his chest, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow as he realized his own daughters had abandoned his defense. Until that moment, Diddy had maintained his composure throughout the trial. But something had changed. Maybe it was seeing the twins sitting in the back of the courtroom rather than at the defense table. Maybe it was the realization that even family loyalty has boundaries that his actions had crossed. Maybe it was knowing that the carefully constructed image of devoted father had crumbled in the most public way possible. Whatever it was, Diddy was done pretending. He wasn't sitting there as a celebrity. He was there as a father whose daughters had made their own moral choice. And when the defense attorney explained that they would need to adjust their witness list due to unforeseen family circumstances, the courtroom wasn't prepared for Diddy's reaction. Because what that moment revealed about the breakdown of family bonds, the weight of evidence presented, and the isolation of a man once surrounded by loyal supporters wasn't just dramatic, it was a warning. If you're finding this story compelling, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more breaking news and in-depth coverage of high-profile cases like this one. I'm standing in front of the federal courthouse, where one of the most personal betrayals in legal history has just unfolded. The air is thick with tension as reporters scramble to make sense of what just happened inside. It started like any other day of the trial. The room buzzed with low conversations. The press hunched in their designated rows, and lawyers whispered strategies as the defense prepared to present character witnesses on Diddy's behalf. But when attorney Marcus Bennett approached the bench with a strained expression, the room changed. You could hear a pin drop. Some people thought it was a routine procedural matter. Others expected a standard delay. But the way Diddy suddenly straightened in his chair, his eyes darting to the back of the courtroom where his daughters sat, told everyone this was different. The judge raised an eyebrow. And Diddy, who'd been projecting confident indifference throughout the proceedings, suddenly looked like a man watching his last lifeline slip away. Diddy gripped the edge of the table, knuckles whitening. No eye contact with anyone. He didn't even glance at the attorneys who were frantically reviewing their witness list. Your Honor, we need to approach the bench regarding our witness schedule, Bennett began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. After a brief sidebar conversation, the judge nodded gravely and Bennett returned to the defense table. And from that moment on, the entire trial shifted, because what happened wasn't part of any legal strategy. It wasn't a tactical decision. It was a daughter's moral choice that had been brewing for years. Bennett addressed the court, his voice carefully controlled. Your Honor, due to unforeseen circumstances, the defense needs to adjust our witness list. Jessie and D'Lila Combs will not be testifying as previously planned. As Bennett spoke, all eyes in the courtroom shifted to the back row where the 17-year-old twins sat, their expressions solemn but resolute. They didn't look at their father. Their gaze remained fixed straight ahead. Outside the courtroom, fans and curious onlookers gathered, unaware that inside, the most damaging blow to Diddy's defense had come not from prosecutors but from his own family. As the implications of this development became clear, Diddy's physical reaction was immediate and alarming. His breathing became labored, his hand clutched at his tie as if it were choking him, and for the first time in the trial, the carefully maintained facade of the confident music mogul cracked completely. To understand the significance of the twins' decision, you need to understand Diddy's public image as a family man. For years, Sean Diddy Combs presented himself as the devoted father of 6 children from different relationships. His social media was filled with family moments, lavish birthday parties, graduation celebrations, family vacations on private yachts. The twins, Jessie and D'Lila, born in 2006 to Diddy and model Kim Porter, were frequently featured in these carefully curated glimpses into his personal life. After Porter's tragic death in 2018, Diddy often spoke about his commitment to raising their children, positioning himself as the dedicated father, stepping up in their mother's absence. "I'm now a full-time father," he told media outlets. "It's a role I embrace, a promise I made to Kim." This image of the devoted father became central to Diddy's public persona in recent years, softening the edges of his business-focused reputation. The twins appeared alongside him at red carpet events, in Instagram posts, and in carefully choreographed family moments that generated positive media coverage. When legal troubles began mounting, Diddy's defense strategy seemed clear. Present himself as a family man whose character was vouched for by his own children. Court documents revealed that the defense had planned to call several character witnesses, with the twins featured prominently on that list. Their testimony was expected to humanize Diddy, to show a different side from the calculating businessman, portrayed by prosecutors. They would speak to his role as a loving father, his grief after their mother's death, his presence at school events, and his guidance in their lives. But as the trial progressed and evidence mounted, something changed. Sources close to the family reported growing tension between Diddy and his daughters. The twins, now 17 and developing their own sense of identity and values, began asking difficult questions about the allegations. According to these sources, the breaking point came after particularly damning testimony from a former associate who described events that directly contradicted stories Diddy had told his children. The twins, who had been attending the trial sporadically, were present for this testimony. Witnesses described seeing them leave the courtroom visibly shaken. They grew up believing certain things about their father, one family friend told reporters. Hearing those narratives challenged with evidence was devastating for them. The night before they were scheduled to testify, the twins reportedly had a long, emotional conversation with their godmother, a close friend of their late mother. What was said remains private, but the next morning, their attorney informed the defense team that Jessie and D'Lila would not be testifying as planned. Defense attorney Bennett attempted to persuade them, emphasizing the impact their decision would have on their father's case. According to courthouse sources, their response was simple but resolute. "We can't say things we no longer believe are true." This decision wasn't made lightly. These weren't rebellious teenagers acting on impulse. They were young women facing an impossible moral choice between family loyalty and their own integrity. Their decision to withdraw as witnesses came after days of evident internal struggle, visible to those who observed them in court. When they arrived that morning, they chose seats in the back of the courtroom rather than their usual place behind the defense table, a physical representation of the emotional distance that had grown between them and their father. As Bennett informed the court of the change to the witness list, the twins sat with perfect posture, their expressions composed, but their clasped hands betraying their inner tension. This wasn't a betrayal in their eyes. It was the painful recognition that they could no longer support a narrative they had come to doubt. For Diddy, this public withdrawal of support from his own daughters represented something far more damaging than any testimony from former business associates. It was the collapse of the family man image he had so carefully cultivated, and it happened in front of a jury who couldn't help but draw their own conclusions about what it meant. The defense calls Jessie and D'Lila Combs to the stand. Bennett had planned to announce that morning. It would have been a powerful moment. Twin daughters standing up for their father, humanizing him in ways no other witness could. Instead, Bennett stood before the court looking visibly uncomfortable. "Your Honor, there has been a change to our witness list. We will not be calling Jessie and D'Lila Combs at this time." The judge peered over her glasses. "Counselor, these witnesses were central to your planned defense, as outlined in your witness list. May I ask the reason for this change?" Bennett cleared his throat. "They are unavailable at this time, Your Honor." The prosecutor, Sarah Mitchell, immediately rose. "Your Honor, the witnesses in question are clearly present in the courtroom. If they're being withdrawn as witnesses, the jury has a right to understand why." The judge turned to Bennett. "Counselor?" After a moment's hesitation, Bennett replied, "Your Honor, Miss Jessie and Miss D'Lila Combs have exercised their right to decline to testify. As they are not under subpoena, but were voluntary character witnesses, we must respect their decision." This admission sent a ripple through the courtroom. Diddy, who had been leaning forward to whisper something to his attorney, suddenly froze, his face registering shock and then something more concerning. "Physical distress," the prosecutor pressed further. "Your Honor, given that these witnesses were characterized as providing essential testimony about the defendant's character and family life, central elements of the defense strategy, their withdrawal seems highly relevant." The judge considered this. "Mr. Bennett, were alternative arrangements considered, such as a deposition or written statement?" Bennett's response was telling. "We explored those options, Your Honor. The witnesses declined all forms of testimony." As this exchange continued, Diddy's physical state deteriorated visibly. His breathing became labored. He loosened his tie and began gulping water from a glass that trembled in his hand. The judge noticed his distress. "Mr. Bennett, is your client in need of medical attention?" Before Bennett could answer, Diddy stood abruptly, swaying slightly. "I need to speak to my daughters," he said, his voice strained. "Please, I need 5 minutes with them." The judge shook her head. "Mr. Combs, please be seated. This is not an appropriate time for—" "They don't understand," Diddy interrupted. An unprecedented breach of courtroom protocol that showed how severely his composure had fractured. "They've heard things out of context. I need to explain. Mr. Combs!" The judge's voice was sharp. "Sit down immediately, or you will be removed from this courtroom." As court officers moved toward him, Diddy sank back into his chair, his eyes fixed on his daughters in the back row. They remained motionless, their gazes directed straight ahead, deliberately avoiding looking at their father. The judge called for a 15-minute recess. As the court cleared, Diddy was led to a side room, his breathing still labored. A court medical officer summoned to check his vital signs. During the break, courthouse sources reported seeing the twins huddled with their godmother and a family attorney in a private conference room, their young faces bearing the weight of their decision. When court resumed, Diddy had regained some physical composure, though he appeared pale and subdued. The twins returned to the same seats, still maintaining their distance. Bennett approached the bench again. "Your Honor, the defense would like to call our next witness, Mr. James Reynolds, the substitute character witness, a longtime business associate rather than family, took the stand, but the damage had been done. The empty space where Diddy's daughters should have been speaking on his behalf spoke volumes to the jury. As Reynolds testified about Diddy's business acumen and charitable works, many in the courtroom noted that the music mogul barely seemed to be listening. His eyes kept drifting to the back of the room, to the daughters whose silence now testified more powerfully than any words they might have spoken in his defense. The twins' decision to withdraw as witnesses didn't happen in isolation. As the trial had progressed, a pattern had emerged through testimony and evidence, one that painted Diddy not just as a demanding businessman, but as someone obsessed with control in all areas of his life. During the afternoon session, as the IV defense struggled to recover from the morning setback, this theme resurfaced through the cross-examination of Reynolds, the replacement character witness. "Mr. Reynolds," Prosecutor Mitchell began, "you've testified about Mr. Combs's business practices and charitable work. In your experience, how does Mr. Combs typically respond when people disagree with him or refuse his requests?" Reynolds shifted, uncomfortably. "Sean is particular about how things are done. He has high standards." "High standards," Mitchell repeated. "Would you say he expects complete loyalty and compliance from those around him?" "Objection, leading," Bennett called. "Out. Sustained." The judge ruled, Mitchell rephrased. "In your observation, how does Mr. Combs respond when his expectations aren't met?" Reynolds hesitated. "He can be disappointed, forceful in expressing that disappointment." "Forceful," Mitchell echoed. "Can you give the jury an example of this?" "Forceful expression of disappointment." As Reynolds described an incident involving a music video director who was publicly berated for deviating from Diddy's vision, the connection to the morning's events was impossible to ignore. This was a man accustomed to controlling his environment and the people in it, including, perhaps, his own family's narrative. Throughout the trial, witnesses had described Diddy's need for control over his image, his business, his associates. Former employees testified about strict NDAs, about phones being collected at meetings, about consequences for those who stepped out of line. There was a playbook, one former assistant had testified earlier in the trial. Everything had to follow his vision, his rules. Deviation wasn't tolerated. This testimony had painted a picture of a man who carefully orchestrated every aspect of his public and private life. His social media presence, presenting him as a devoted father, was part of that orchestration. Carefully edited glimpses into a life where he was always in control of the narrative. The twins' decision to withdraw as witnesses represented something unprecedented in Diddy's experience, a loss of control over his own family story, a refusal to participate in the narrative he had constructed. During a brief afternoon break, reporters observed a tense exchange between Diddy and Bennett. Though they couldn't hear the words, the body language was clear. Diddy gesturing emphatically toward where his daughters sat. Bennett shaking his head firmly. When court resumed, Bennett approached the bench for yet another sidebar conference. When he returned to the defense table, his expression confirmed what many had suspected. There would be no reconciliation, no last-minute change of heart from the twins. As the afternoon testimony continued, focusing on business practices and charitable contributions, Diddy seemed increasingly disconnected from the proceedings. His legendary focus, the attention to detail that had built his empire, was noticeably absent. Instead, he appeared distracted, occasionally glancing back at his daughters, who maintained their composed but distant demeanor. The courtroom dynamics told a story beyond the official testimony, of a family fracture happening in real time, of young women making a difficult moral choice, and of a father facing the reality that some things cannot be controlled, no matter how powerful you are. For the jury, watching this family drama unfold provided insights no testimony could convey. The twins' silent presence in the back of the courtroom, rather than at the witness stand speaking on their father's behalf, was a statement more powerful than any words they might have offered. As the court day neared its end, the defense called its final witness, a longtime business partner who spoke about Diddy's entrepreneurial vision and commitment to developing black-owned businesses. The testimony was solid, but lacked the emotional impact the defense had clearly been counting on from the twins' appearance. During the final break, before closing arguments were scheduled, the courthouse hallway became the scene of what witnesses described as Diddy's breaking point. As the twins prepared to leave with their godmother and attorney, Diddy approached them, court security officers watching closely. "Please," he was heard saying, his voice stripped of its usual authority. 5 minutes. Just give me 5 minutes." The twins' godmother stepped between them and Diddy. "This isn't the time or place," she said firmly. "They've made their decision." "They're my daughters," Diddy responded, his voice rising. "They don't understand what's at stake here." It was D'Lila who spoke then, her voice quiet but clear enough for those nearby to hear. "We understand exactly what's at stake. That's why we can't do it." Jessie added, "We love you, Dad, but we can't say what you want us to say. Not after everything we've heard." Security officers moved closer as Diddy's expression darkened. For a moment, those watching feared he might lose control completely. Then, in a voice raw with emotion, he said, "Your mother would never have let this happen." The response came not from either twin, but from their godmother, her voice steel-edged with controlled anger. "Don't you dare use Kim that way. She would have protected these girls at all costs, even from you." This exchange, witnessed by several reporters and court attendees, captured what many described as the true breaking point, not just of Diddy's defense strategy, but of the carefully maintained facade of family unity he had presented to the world. When court resumed, the change in Diddy was evident to everyone present. The confident swagger was gone. The strategic whispers to his attorneys had ceased. He sat immobile, staring straight ahead, a man finally confronting the limits of his influence. Bennett delivered his closing argument, a technically proficient but emotionally flat appeal to consider Diddy's business accomplishments and cultural contributions. What was meant to be a passionate defense, culminating with the powerful image of loving daughters vouching for their father's character, had become a sterile recitation of career highlights. Throughout Bennett's closing, Diddy remained uncharacteristically passive, offering none of the nods or responsive expressions attorneys typically rely on from their clients to connect with the jury. He appeared shut down, withdrawn into himself, processing the personal rejection that had unfolded in the most public arena possible. As Bennett concluded, the judge announced that the prosecution would deliver their closing argument the following morning. The twins rose immediately, filing out of the courtroom without a backward glance at their father. Diddy watched them leave, his expression unreadable. Then, in a moment, captured by courtroom sketch artists that would later appear on front pages, nationwide, his head dropped into his hands in a gesture of utter defeat. This wasn't the reaction of a man concerned about legal strategy. It was the response of a father who had just lost something far more valuable than the case itself: the trust and support of his children. As the court emptied, legal analysts gathered in the hallway began revising their predictions about the EU trial's outcome. The twins' refusal to testify wasn't just a setback for the defense. It was, in the words of one commentator, the most damaging character testimony possible, delivered without a single word being spoken. The following morning, the courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Overnight, news of the twins' refusal to testify had spread, generating intense speculation about the impact on both the case and the family. As Diddy entered, Observers noted his appearance had deteriorated markedly. The designer suit hung loosely, his normally meticulous grooming was noticeably lacking, and the confident stride had been replaced by the tentative steps of a man carrying an invisible weight. More shocking to longtime observers was the absence of his usual entourage. Where Diddy typically arrived surrounded by associates and supporters, today he walked in accompanied only by his legal team. The isolation that had begun with his daughter's withdrawal had apparently expanded, leaving the once surrounded mogul visibly alone. When the twins entered, they took seats even further back in the courtroom, now accompanied not just by their godmother, but by an older woman identified as Kim Porter's mother, their maternal grandmother who had flown in overnight, reportedly to support their decision. As the prosecutor rose to deliver her closing argument, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Mitchell approached the jury with measured steps, her expression solemn. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, "throughout this trial, you've heard extensive testimony about Mr. Combs's business practices, about contracts and deals, about an empire built on talent and determination, but also, as the evidence has shown, on intimidation and control." She paced slowly before the jury box. "The defense has asked you to consider Mr. Combs's character, his contributions to music and culture, his role as a father and family man. They've presented witnesses who've spoken to his business acumen and philanthropy." Mitchell paused, her gaze sweeping across the courtroom. "But I'd like you to consider not just what you've heard in this courtroom, but what you've witnessed. Yesterday, this court saw something extraordinary, not in testimony, but in actions." Bennett immediately rose. "Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is referring to matters not in evidence." "Your Honor," Mitchell countered, "I am referring to observable courtroom events directly relevant to character testimony the defense itself planned to present." After a brief sidebar, the judge ruled. "The objection is overruled, but counsel should proceed with caution." Mitchell nodded and continued. "The defense announced at the beginning of this trial that character would be central to their case. They plan to present Mr. Combs not just as a successful businessman, but as a devoted father whose own children would vouch for his character." She turned slightly, though careful not to gesture toward the twins. "When those same children, after sitting in this courtroom and hearing the evidence presented, choose to withdraw their testimony, that choice itself speaks volumes." Bennett rose again. "Objection. Speculation about witnesses' motivations." "Sustained," the judge ruled. "The jury will disregard counsel's characterization of motivations." Mitchell nodded. "What is not speculation, ladies and gentlemen, is that actions often reveal character more truthfully than words. Throughout this trial, you've heard testimony about how Mr. Combs responds when people refuse to comply with his expectations, with pressure, with consequences, with what multiple witnesses have described as making an example of those who step out of line." She approached the jury. "Yet yesterday, when faced with non-compliance from those closest to him, we all observed Mr. Combs's reaction. Not controlled, not strategic, but visceral. That reaction revealed something words cannot convey. The response of someone unused to having his control challenged, especially by those he considers his own." As Mitchell continued her closing argument, methodically connecting evidence to charges, Diddy's physical distress became increasingly apparent. His breathing grew labored again, his complexion ashen. Midway through Mitchell's summation, he abruptly stood, swaying slightly. "Your Honor," Bennett said urgently, "my client needs a brief recess." The judge looked concerned. "Mr. Combs, are you ill?" Diddy didn't seem to hear the question. His gaze was fixed on his daughters at the back of the room. "I did everything for you," he said, his voice carrying in the suddenly silent courtroom. "Everything." Court officers moved quickly toward him, as Bennett tried to get him to sit down. The twins remained motionless, their expressions a complex mixture of pain and resolution. "Mr. Combs, please be seated, or you will be removed from the courtroom," the judge ordered. Instead of complying, Diddy turned to the jury. "They don't understand," he said, his voice breaking. "I built this for them. Everything I did was to give them a legacy." As officers reached him, Diddy's legs seemed to give way. He didn't so much sit as collapse back into his chair, his breathing now alarmingly rapid. The judge immediately called a recess, ordering medical assistance. As Diddy was helped from the courtroom, his gaze remained fixed on his daughters, who still hadn't moved from their seats, their hands tightly clasped together, tears now streaming silently down their faces. This unplanned, unscripted moment, a father's breakdown, daughters caught between love and moral choice, had revealed more about the true dynamics at play than days of carefully prepared testimony ever could. Diddy was taken to a private room where medical personnel confirmed he was experiencing a severe anxiety attack. Court was adjourned for the remainder of the day, with closing arguments scheduled to resume the following morning. Outside the courthouse, the scene was chaotic. News of Diddy's collapse and the twins' refusal to testify had created a media frenzy. Legal analysts debated the impact on the jury, with most agreeing that the family drama had likely done irreparable damage to the defense. When your own children won't speak for you after hearing the evidence, that sends a powerful message to the jury, one former prosecutor explained on a live broadcast. No legal strategy can effectively counter that kind of silent testimony. Social too. Media erupted with reactions, the hashtags Diddy Twins and Daughters Stand trending worldwide. Many praised the teenagers for their apparent moral courage, while others questioned whether they were being manipulated by others with grievances against their father. The twins themselves left the courthouse surrounded by security, their grandmother and godmother forming a protective barrier against shouted questions. Their composed expressions never faltered, though witnesses described seeing them break down in tears once inside their vehicle. When court resumed the next day, Diddy returned, looking physically diminished, but with his emotions now tightly controlled. The twins were noticeably absent, their attorney informing the court they would be watching the proceedings remotely. Mitchell completed her closing argument without further incident, systematically connecting evidence to charges, while occasionally reminding the jury of the human impact of Diddy's alleged actions. When the jury retired to deliberate, few expected a lengthy process. The combination of documentary evidence, witness testimony, and the unmistakable family fracture had created a narrative difficult for any defense to overcome. After just 7 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict: guilty on all major counts. As the verdict was read, Diddy stood motionless, his expression blank. Bennett immediately announced their intention to appeal. But the image that dominated media coverage wasn't of Diddy being led away or of celebrating prosecutors. It was the courtroom sketch of two teenage girls sitting apart from their father, choosing truth over family loyalty in the most difficult decision of their young lives. In the days that followed, sources close to the family revealed that the twins had received a letter from their mother years earlier, to be opened when they turned 16. While the contents remained private, these sources suggested that Kim Porter had shared concerns and observations that took on new significance in light of the trial evidence. It wasn't a sudden decision, one family friend told reporters. It was the culmination of a long process of them coming to terms with complicated truths about their father. They loved him, still love him, but they couldn't pretend not to see what had become impossible to ignore. The impact extended beyond the Combs family. Throughout the entertainment industry, the image of the twins' silent refusal became a powerful symbol of a changing culture, one where family loyalty no longer automatically outweighed moral considerations, where powerful men could no longer count on unconditional support from those closest to them. For young women in particular, Jessie and D'Lila became unexpected role models, teenagers who made an agonizing choice based on principle rather than pressure or privilege. In a brief statement released through their attorney, the twins addressed the public reaction. "This was a deeply personal decision that we never wanted to make. We love our father and pray for healing for everyone involved. We ask for privacy as we continue our own healing journey." The statement was notable for what it didn't say. There was no retraction, no qualification of their courtroom decision, no indication that they regretted the choice they had made. For Diddy, the legal consequences of the verdict would be determined at sentencing, but the personal consequences were already evident. The empire he had built, the legacy he had hoped to pass on to his children, had been irreparably damaged not just by legal findings, but by the moral judgment of his own daughters. As one commentator noted, in trying to control everything and everyone around him, Diddy ultimately lost control of the thing that mattered most: the trust and respect of his children. No verdict could be more damning than that silent testimony. 3 weeks after the verdict, as Diddy awaited sentencing, the twins were photographed visiting a women's shelter with their grandmother and godmother, making a substantial donation in Kim Porter's name. The symbolism was lost on no one. 2 young women choosing to honor their mother's memory by supporting other women finding their voice and independence. In that simple act of charity was perhaps the most powerful statement of all, that from painful truth can come healing, that choosing integrity over loyalty isn't betrayal, but courage, and that sometimes the most loving thing a child can do for a parent is to refuse to perpetuate their illusions. If you found this story compelling and want to stay updated on developments in this case and others like it, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. As this story continues to unfold, we'll bring you thoughtful analysis of the legal and personal implications. The courage shown by these young women reminds us that integrity sometimes requires making the hardest choices, even when those choices break our hearts.